In a quiet residential area of West Berlin, hidden behind fences and partly underground, the Berlin Document Center held the records of millions of people who had served the Nazi state. Created by the Allies after the Second World War, it became a central storehouse for documents used in the Nuremberg trials and in later investigations of Nazi crimes. Its files included Nazi party membership cards, SS personnel records, SA files, and documents from many other organizations of the Third Reich. For nearly 50 years, the archive was run by the United States. As the Berlin Document Center approached its transfer from American administration to the German Federal Archives in 1994, a camera crew went inside to interview David Marwell, the center's final American director, about who had access to the documents, the scale of the collection, the stories hidden in its records, and what investigators had uncovered inside the files.
What kind of documents are there?
I can give you one sentence that will describe most of our records, and that is that they are personnel-related files of the Nazi Party and of Nazi Party organizations, like the SS and SA. That covers most of the records. There's a small number of records that are not personnel-related, but organized by institution or by administration. And then we have a very large collection of records that is from the Reich Kulturkammer, which was not a party institution. The kind of seed crystal for the whole collection, the crown jewel of the collection, is the central membership files of the Nazi Party, which is a card file of some 11 million file cards in several series, which describes the Nazi Party membership almost completely. In addition to that, we have, for instance, almost a complete collection of SS officer files, a very large but incomplete collection of personnel-related files of the SA, the Sturmabteilung, files of the Race and Settlement Main Office of the SS. These are the files that related to an SS member's racial suitability and also the suitability of his or her chosen mate for marriage. In other words, marriages were evaluated on racial grounds.
Yeah.
Files of the Immigration Central Office of the Nazi state, which was involved with processing applications for citizenship made by ethnic Germans. A very important, very large collection. Yeah, and then a large number of miscellaneous collections from Reich Erziehungsministerium, that would be records of college professors, to records of the Nazi Party Supreme Court, to the Volksgerichtshof, the so-called People's Court, records of the Gestapo in Würzburg.
Up until now, who's really allowed to look at this stuff?
Well, we've got two functions, and these two functions are really defined in a way by the type of customer we have, if you want to use a kind of business analogy. We are, on one hand, what I would call a record center, what we in the United States would call a record center. We have records that are of current interest to current agencies, records that are necessary. Let me just answer that.
Okay.
Yeah? Give it to Birgit.
Let me ask you again. You had said, in a business sense, the customers. Who's allowed? Who gets access?
Yeah. One side, we are what we would call in the United States a record center. We have records of current interest to current agencies. An insurance agency in Germany needs to calculate a retirement pension. They need to know whether someone was active professionally during the period 33 to 45. They simply ask us whether we have any information that would be relevant to that inquiry. It matters very little to the clerk working on that file that we have historical files. They simply want to get that file off their desk and move on to the next. That's the first type of customer, and we have several hundred, if not several thousand, German agencies that request routinely information of us. Citizenship agencies that must decide on granting or recognizing German citizenship. I would say in 1993 we received or processed about 27,000 requests for information of this type, involving about 55,000 name checks. The other side of the house were more or less a traditional archive, where researchers come from all over the world specifically to try to understand the past. And on that side of the house, last year, 1993, we received about 1,300 requests and checked about 20-some-odd thousand names in connection with that. Then I suppose there's really a third type of request, which would be those involved with the investigation of war crimes. It's a much smaller number, probably 500 or so names checked last year in that connection.
Is that then with the U.S. research, or is that?
This would be German Staatsanwaltschaften, prosecutors, the corresponding offices in the United States and Canada and Great Britain and Australia, and somewhere else.
Does Brazil get involved with that,
No.
or Argentina, or anything like that? Even
No,
though
they don't have an active program of war crimes investigation and prosecution, but the countries I mentioned do, and they routinely require information from us.
Does Simon Wiesenthal come through here
In
at
connection
all?
with the investigation of war crimes, he has received information, yes. On the archival side of the house, which is really what's, for most people, most interesting, we have I guess, a fairly complicated access policy, but it resolves down to a very simple principle. Serious researchers with serious research projects will get access to the records. As I mentioned before, these are records relating to individuals and contain in part intimate information that was private at the time it was collected, information about medical issues, about financial issues, about, in some cases, unsubstantiated criminal allegations, things that are protected under all archival systems for people who are still alive. And in that sense, for the general public, there are some restrictions for files on people who are still living. But for the most part, people with a good reason to have the records get access.
Why is this going to be given over?
There's a general archival principle that records belong with the country that created them, and one must see the collection of the Document Center records in a much larger context. These are only a small fraction of the records that had been captured by U.S. and Western Allied troops, most of which have already been returned, and this is simply the last large collection of such records.
Why weren't they given back earlier? Was this sort of a political football, or people?
I only know, I stepped into this process at a fairly late date. When I got to Berlin in December of 1988, the decision to return the records was firm, and the time schedule was set. And you'd have to ask someone else about why it wasn't given back earlier. I just don't know.
Okay. Why are we, why is the U.S. microfishing these?
Again, if we go back to this much larger context of captured records, one will discover that all captured records, captured by the U.S. and by the British, had been microfilmed before the return. Initially, perhaps to preserve access to them. There's certainly in the later years a much more powerful reason to microfilm the records, and that is as conservation. And were we not to be microfilming the records, then the Bundesarchiv would certainly do that, because it is the only effective way of preserving them. Records of this vintage hold within them the seeds of their own destruction and will eventually self-destruct, basically, unless one spends more money than would be reasonable to preserve them on a case-by-case basis. So the best and most effective means of preservation is microfilm, and these records will then supplement a much larger collection of records that already exists on microfilm in the United States of captured German records.
Oh, really?
Thousands, tens of thousands of rolls of microfilm, of ministerial records, of military records, of party records.
That the U.S. already has?
Already has, from the records that had been captured and returned before.
Okay.
And so that this, if one looks at this whole process of capturing records, of evaluating them, of microfilming, of returning them, then one sees the Document Center only as one part of a much larger process.
They're going to Koblenz then, the German federal?
No, they'll stay here, and the Bundesarchiv will actually just come in here. The major difference will be there'll be someone else sitting in this chair, another flag out front, and perhaps a slightly different organization. But the mission should be the same, and certainly the records will be the same, and very happy to say that the staff will be by and large the same. We were able to secure the positions of all of our staff.
What was it like on the Mengele thing? So was it useful? Was it helpful?
Was what?
The Mengele?
The document center? Was
confirming his,
was
using the document center?
Yeah, actually, it's interesting. The Mengele's application for marriage in the SS and the physical examination that he had to undergo in connection with that application provided us with the only reliable information on Mengele's appearance and certain details about his medical history and his dental chart and all those things that was available, so that Mengele's BDC file was crucial in assisting us to make some decisions about whether his body was actually lying there in the grave in São Paulo.
And that was his body?
Yes, indeed, yeah.
On this thing on the thefts, though, what was stolen a couple of years ago?
Yeah. We know it was stolen by what's been recovered, and there are a couple of things to say about the thefts. First of all, the theft of archival material is, in my view, one of the most serious crimes, because you're not simply robbing one person of their property, but you're robbing the whole future generation of historians and researchers from the ability to effectively research a particular subject. We were saved from a much more severe or much larger tragedy by two things. One, the thieves were motivated apparently by commercial motives and stole material that was, by I think any standard, not so important from a historical standpoint. For instance, they would steal a form that recommended someone for promotion and was signed by a higher ranking officer. And what they simply wanted was the SS officer's signature. The form contains no information but that the person was recommended for promotion. The fact that the person was promoted is reflected elsewhere in the file, so that document missing would alter someone's knowledge very little. The second thing is, and this is the most important, the grand majority of records that were stolen from collections that had already been microfilmed back in the late 1960s, so we have a complete record. And those two things combined to make the impact of the theft much, much more mild than it might have been.
Were they selling these things to collectors or something?
Yeah, that's what the court found, that the thefts were commercially motivated, and that the records stolen from here found their way into this very large and elaborate Militaria market, which has many different levels, from the flea market to very fancy auction houses.
Is that investigation still going on? Is that
no, I mean, there was a trial in December '88, which the judgment was handed down in January of '89, where 4 people were convicted of either theft or helerai, which means the dealing in stolen property. From time to time, we receive tips that our documents, that original documents, presumably from here, have found their way onto the market, and then we're in contact with the German police to try to get them back.
Okay. On the Stasi files, is there very much that cross on
well,
that?
the fact that the Federal Republic of Germany succeeded not only Nazi Germany but also the German Democratic Republic, it's a successor state to both, and that the Stasi records are similar in some ways to the records in the Document Center, that brings to mind lots of potential comparisons. And when the Stasi files opened up 2 years ago, I had a whole line of journalists here trying to draw the comparisons and the parallels. In a way, the records that are made available, as I understand it, by the Stasi Unterlagengesetz, the law that grants access to Stasi files, guarantees access for records of people who were victims of Stasi spying and Stasi reporting. In that sense, they are qualitatively different than the records that we have at the Document Center. The records here are the records of the people who did the spying and the perpetrators, and not the victims. In that sense, the comparison really doesn't hold together. Of course, yeah.
Mm-hmm. I want to ask you just, anything extraordinary now? Is there is very much on Hitler in there at all?
Well, Hitler stands behind every file we have, in a sense, as the person who was crucial to the Nazi regime. There are, in fact, very dramatic files here, single dramatic files. But the real story about these files is, in some ways, their lack of drama. That these are the routine files that deal with routine matters, and they're useful for historians in trying to understand a very complex organization, complex set of motives. But you don't find a lot of smoking guns here, to use the Watergate analogy. I was investigating war crimes for 10 years, and very rarely did you find the smoking gun in the Document Center file. What you found was information that would either give meaning to other evidence that you had, or help you to create a structure in which to put other information, to give you a piece of a mosaic of a much larger, more complex picture. There are, in fact, occasionally you find something that you would call a smoking gun, but by and large, the meaning of these files is to help you understand the structure and larger, more complicated issues.
Did you ever find anything that sort of surprised you that you saw in there?
Yeah, there are little surprises all the time. The more records you see, the fewer, of course, you encounter. But I think most people have the mental image that when you open these files, blood will begin to drip from them, and there'll be detail after detail of horrendous crimes. That's not the case. But there are kind of routine details about people who committed horrendous crimes, and therein lies a lesson, it seems to me, as well.
How many documents are there then in this whole?
Well, we measure documents by. It's difficult to determine precisely how many documents there are, but we measure them by running meters, and we have somewhere around 13,000 running meters of documents. So 13 kilometers of records.
Flat?
Flat, yeah, face to face, as if it were one bookshelf and the record standing up. It would be 13 kilometers long. And we estimate that that's probably somewhere around 70 million pieces of paper and probably 20 to 25 million files. It just depends on definition and depends on how you count them.
25 million individuals then?
No, one individual might have more than one file that relates to him, so that they're probably in the region of 13 to 15 million individuals who have files here.
Did all Nazis have to have a file here?
Well, we have the central membership files of the Nazi Party, and that is probably 90% complete, at least 90% complete. So that for those 90% or more, there would be at least a party membership record.
David, if you could sum up sort of the history of the Document Center and the documents themselves, though. Could you?
Yeah, it's maybe just a little bit about the facility here. This building was built by the German Postal Ministry as a technical installation for telephone service. All of the major telephone lines for at least a part of Berlin ran through the basement of this building. And it was a significantly important communications facility for that reason. At the same time, Nazi intelligence agencies took advantage of the fact that these trunk lines ran through the basement and set up an Abhörzentrale, a listening post where they eavesdropped into telephone conversations. The Soviet army took Berlin and occupied it alone for a couple of months in the late spring of '45. Apparently, they took this facility as a military goal in order to disrupt communications. They destroyed all the equipment here. So when the Americans got here in July of '45, the signals people said the equipment could not be salvaged. They emptied it all out, and that left behind a very large and very empty building that was considered an ideal place to bring literally hundreds of tons of captured German records that had been found all over Western Europe, primarily in the areas that were occupied by the U.S. Army or overrun by the U.S. Army. The U.S. Army then founded the Document Center, summer of '45. Records began to pour in the fall of '45 and continued to do so up through 1949, 1950. The first mission of the Document Center was to support the Nuremberg war crimes tribunals, both the International Tribunal and the so-called subsequent proceedings. And then following that, this very ambitious effort at denazification was supported in a very crucial and intimate way with the documents here at the Document Center. In 1953, the Army transferred control of the Document Center to the State Department, and we were a component unit of the U.S. mission Berlin until unification of Germany, and then we're now a part of the U.S. Embassy Office Berlin, and will remain so until July 1st, 1994, when we turn the entire facility and the staff over to the German Federal Archives.
On July 1st, 1994, the Berlin Document Center was officially transferred from United States control to German authority and incorporated into the German Federal Archives, ensuring that millions of Nazi-era records would remain preserved as part of Germany's historical record.